And we are now live.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our short-term rental ad hoc meeting. And I want to welcome our guest here, the public. And so we called the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. And we'd have the territorial acknowledgement. So I would like to formally recognize the traditional keepers of this land, and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the township of Alma-Colman is located on the Mississauga Anishinaabe territory and the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. The township of Alma-Colman specifically acknowledges that the Mississauga nations are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in the perpetuity, and they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. So I will need an approval for the agenda as circulated by Joan Stover, seconder. Jamie. Any discussion? Okay, Britt.
Just to note that under new business, there is an item. I was hoping to have had a submission in time for the agenda, but I was sick for over a week. So I was a little late in getting it prepared, but I have it here tonight. So I know we're not going to discuss it, but at least I can give a couple of minutes overview and then hand out a hard copy to people so they have it to take home. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor of the agenda? All in favor? Okay. Okay, approval of the minutes of March the 8th, 2023 short-term rental ad hoc committee meeting.
I do have something I'd like to say.
What was that, Valerie?
Hold it. It's got to be moved and second first, Valerie. I'll move adoption.
Okay, Valerie and Steve. For the approval of the minutes from March the 8th that are.
I would like to speak to the minutes, please.
Well, we have to get a seconder first, Valerie, and then you can speak.
I can second if you'd like.
So we have a motion.
Yes,
We need a motion first.
I moved it.
Britt made the motion and we need a seconder.
And I said I
Steve?
would second it if you would like.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
I moved in. Valerie is now second. Yeah.
okay, so whoever made the motion first gets the first chance to speak.
I have only one comment to make about them. There's a typo throughout the minutes. The word principal is misspelled. When we talk about principal residence, it should be PRINCIPAL, not PLE. So I won't cite sections if the clerk could just do a Control F and then change them all. Aside from that, those are my only comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so number 3, I guess, is do we have disclosure of pecuniary interest? Sorry.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I do have.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so in taking a look at the minutes of our last meeting, March 8, I see that there was a discussion or a portion discussion recorded about the bylaw 89-2022 and the checklist. What I don't see is a record of what sections were adopted as is. So when I look at the minutes, I anticipated seeing which things we had adopted as is and which things we were still going to be dealing with, because a number of points were made during our discussions as we went section by section. For instance, the section 4 on license, should it only be in permitted owner principal residences? We looked at penalties, we looked at fines. a discussion about what is in the what is adverse to the public interest. That's as it relates to the overall bylaw, the checklist, items required to complete the application. The very last item, I brought this up, and this is as it relates to those in existence prior to May 19, 2022. They gave examples of the last section of that checklist, gives examples such as guest comments on the website, receiving regular income or receipts from rentals. But I believe that there should be set out details such as how verification of the grandfathering should be dealt with when the information that is provided, if it is provided by the person seeking a license, if it's inaccurate. Because, for instance, we were told as the bylaw was developed last year that a continuous operation would be grandfathered. And if they have said that it's in continuous operation, but neighbors living adjacent or anyone else who can identify and provide firsthand knowledge that it was not in operation, that should be, I believe, part of that checklist as well. But I do believe that we should know
So Valerie,
what things we've adopted and what things are still open for discussion in bylaw. Just one moment.
so
Bylaw
Valerie, while you're,
39-20.
can I just make a comment?
Yes,
So
please.
we are going to bring that stuff back. We just didn't bring it back to this meeting because we're going to deal with the zoning bylaw today. I can let Jennifer here speak a little bit about what the process is for us.
Sure, through you, Chair. Valerie, at the last meeting, I believe the consensus of the committee was that at this meeting, we're going to be discussing zoning and where the uses would be permitted. And at the next meeting, staff were going to be preparing an updated licensing bylaw based on the discussions and the agreements of the suggestions of the committee at last week's meeting, or sorry, 2 weeks ago's meeting. To discuss both items at one meeting it's just too much to digest. So we went through the licensing bylaw last week, comments were made, and staff have notes, and an updated bylaw is going to be brought back to the committee at your next meeting.
May I ask one question, Mr. Chair? And that is, I understood we were going to discuss the notice of motion about whether or not we should get into discussing the zoning bylaw, which some people believed, including myself, is outside the mandate of this committee. So I don't recall voting on the motion that we are actually going to undertake that aspect as part of our mandate.
Yeah, I could ask Yolanda maybe to clarify that. It's in our minutes there that what we did with that. But I know it was brought up and voted on that we would be doing that.
There actually wasn't a vote, but we did discuss at the last meeting under next items to be discussed at the next meeting. We did list that we would be discussing the zoning bylaw. There was no motion required, as it was just a listing of items that we were going to put on the agenda for the next meeting. So no votes were done at the last meeting or motions. The notice of motion that you see on today's agenda was brought forward by another committee member who had mentioned that notice at our last meeting as well. And I informed her to fill out the notice of motion form to be placed on this agenda. At the time, she did want to discuss zoning at the last meeting, but we had advised her that we wouldn't be doing that at that meeting, which is why she completed that notice of motion form, which is likely moot at this point because that is what we're discussing today.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to note that as from my perspective, the bylaw is not what we were asked to look at as far as our mandate is concerned. And I believe it is outside the scope of our ad hoc committee.
Well, no, I don't think it is. It's on the agenda and we're going to discuss it. And we're going to go through it. And if we're going to make changes, then that'll be up to this committee. Grit?
To Valerie's point, I do believe that we still need to look at the bylaw. But the actual goal of this STR committee was to advise and assist council on matters associated with developing a bylaw to address short-term rentals. The bylaw has already been developed and it's been enacted. It's been passed by council. So we were to look at the issues surrounding what brought that bylaw into place, the groups that didn't know about it, that sort of thing, and look at the limitations within the bylaw. So I partially agree with what she's saying.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor of those minutes? Sorry. Yes, that's right, because we're talking about the March 8th minutes. So we've had do we need a raise of hands? Yeah. Okay, of those minutes? All in favor? 4. Yeah. I can do if I need to. Okay. Okay, on to, I have to apologize. I had 2 agendas here, so I kind of skipped over a couple of parts here that was on the old draft one. Okay, so disclosure of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof. Anybody? Okay, approval of the agenda as circulated. The agenda for the short-term rental ad hoc committee meeting on Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023.
We did that.
Okay,
We should be now moving on to item 6.
okay, business arising from the previous minutes. So the correspondence from Valerie McDonald, overview of the past year on Curtis Road in the review of other municipal short-term rental bylaws. And the correspondence from Alicia Montney, reprocessed in the proposed bylaw amendments.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to speak to the
Well-
overview, if that's permitted.
We need to have a mover first, Valerie, and then a seconder, and then we can talk.
May I
Good.
move then, please?
And seconder, Valerie. Britt, you. Okay, Valerie, go ahead.
Okay. I thought that it was perhaps beneficial to this committee to have a firsthand view of what happened in the past year and also a firsthand view of dealing with long-term rentals that are in existence now. So I talk about what has happened in the past year, which from the 6108 Curtis Point Road and area point of view, we did two petitions. We talked to council. We gave presentations. There was a public meeting. The bylaw was developed and passed by May 19. The reason that it was passed by then is because at the public meeting, we discussed with council that there were a number of places that on the long weekend could be coming into operation that very weekend. And it was important to have a bylaw in place so there would be some way to regulate these. And I live beside a position, excuse me, I live beside an Airbnb operation that went into operation after the May 19 bylaw was passed. I've lived here 10 years. I reported the renovations taking place to council before the May 19 bylaw was passed. The winter before that, there was a big fire in the front yard, and construction materials from the renovations were being burned, and the fire chief at the time came out. I have talked to individual councillors, not on the new council, but on the past council, and that's why the bylaw was brought in after a lot of discussion over months and months that would regulate and not allow additional operations to come into being until there was a bylaw in place to regulate. Since then, most recently, I talk about hydro trucks and propane trucks juggling along the private road, which is seasonal residential area. And I raised the question about what is the need, what will happen in the event of emergency when you might have to get emergency vehicles in here along with just regular traffic. I have pictures that show that there's only 10 or 11 feet between the snowbanks on this private road right now. The bottom line is that there are not areas that are suitable for STRs and that private roads are not maintained by the municipality. They definitely should not be. And although it's not in my presentation, our bylaw, our petitions were signed by some businesses. One included the cafe in Grafton on the opposite side of the road from Grafton Town Hall. And I'm sorry that I'm forgetting the name of that one because she was concerned, and also one of two of the resorts. And I think that should be another limiting factor. Resorts are paying business taxes, where that's not the case with Airbnbs or Vrobe or the others. So in terms of suggested changes or additions we might want to highlight in our bylaw, I've indicated under the Grey Highlands that it provides information about where people who have concerns can call the police or bylaw enforcement. It requires a license within 45 days of notification or facing $1,000 penalty. It looks at the goals that a municipality has when licensing, so people understand what is trying to be achieved. There are 4 steps well set out, and responding to a questionnaire might better inform would-be STR operators whether they should proceed or not. There's an upward limit on the STRs in various areas, and there is a licensing tier. Of concern is an absence of appropriate insurance coverage, inspection looking at the bedrooms, and sufficient septic tank or holding tank capacity. In the township of North Frontenac, it identifies a period of 30 days or less when you're receiving financial compensation to be identified as an STR. It does not include recreational campgrounds and trailer parks. Like Grey Highlands, it raises the question with the proponent whether operating an STR is the right business for them, and when building permits are needed for any conversion and contacts related to septic systems. Of concern, unlike the Alnwick-Haldimand and Grey Highlands bylaw, it states the township does not require licensing specific to short-term accommodations, which I believe would be detrimental to this municipality. And it relies on specific bylaws other than a licensing one, such as the one Alnwick-Haldimand has already. Looking at the township of Tiny, it limits the number of applications to a certain number. And in this instance, they use 300. It includes a map of the STRs approved and suspended and under reviewed. The process was made public through a media release, and I think that's a very important step that could be taken. It includes an appeal process, and it includes a letter of final notice to STR rentals. And it says that it's the intention of the township to enforce the bylaw accommodation licensing bylaw, and failure to comply could result in court-assessed fines up to $100,000 per violation. And I'm bringing this up only because we have looked at penalties and fines. In Brighton, no person shall use or operate a short-term accommodation rental dwelling unless he or she holds a license, nor advertise it without a license. Inspection for a license covers everything from the Ontario Building Code and Ontario Fire Protection and Prevention Act to municipal maintenance and occupancy bylaws and the zoning bylaw and any other that has a status on the application. License refusals are listed, including if proof of insurance is not received, operation of the business may be averse to the public interest, and or has a history of municipal bylaw contravention, or if the municipality is owed money. If the license is not obtained, I'm jumping down to 5, just short-term accommodation legally exists on the day of passage of this bylaw shall have until, and they provide a date to obtain a license, after which a license will be granted under full regard and effect to this bylaw as though the lot was never used as a short-term rental accommodation. I think that would be a very appropriate thing to add to our bylaw. And those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Valerie. Anybody else?
Can we respond to Valerie's?
Well, yes, you can, but I would like to just kind of clarify that if we can just not bring up old hashing stuff that's happened 2-3 years ago, like we're here to try to deal with the bylaw. And, you know, what happened a year ago, 1.5 years ago, we can't change that right now. So we have an opportunity to make a new bylaw and change some things that we got or not. And I would prefer that we stick with that, because I know a couple of these items on here have a couple of pages of stuff that's happened in the past. I would just assume we not bring that up, so we're not slinging mud right or left, and then we can just carry on with some of the issues that we talked about that pertains to the bylaw. Nicole was first.
Sorry. I was just going to respond to Valerie about how the bylaw was brought into effect. I do sympathize with Valerie, and it sounds awful. I wouldn't want to be putting up with what you put up with. But when that bylaw was, and that meeting in April of 2022, there was no STRs that were present at that meeting. So we did not have a voice. So I think that now is the time. I brought a package in for the last 2 agendas, which was not presented, and I was not able to talk about my package, but talking about the positive things that STRs bring to this community. Going to business taxes, you're talking about hotels, motels, businesses that pay taxes. When we rent out our Airbnb, HST is collected and paid to the government. So we do, that is taken care of through Airbnb.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alicia, you were next.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Chair, I think that if what you were saying, that we didn't want to bring up, you know, old things from time past and we want to move forward, you know, I have also added an item, a little outline to the package, but, you know, I won't, you know, go through all of those things as you've asked. However, you know, I also don't think it's super fair that Valerie was just able to go through and bring up, you know, all these things, hearsay potentially, you know, were those complaints actually filed with the township? You know, there's a lot of things in there that is hearsay potentially. And, you know, if all of those comments and complaints weren't actually submitted to the township, then the township didn't have an opportunity to respond. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that we have to have an equal representation.
Grit will know that those are first
Valerie?
from me.
Valerie,
I filed.
hang on. Okay, you were done, Alicia?
Well, I was just going to say is that if those complaints were brought forward, this was another point that I wanted to bring up, is that we have been asking for more details on the actual complaints so that we could really understand what those complaints are, if they're noise. And I know in the last meeting, the deputy fire chief had noted that a number of those complaints were actually noise. And so, you know, without actually being able to get more dialed into what the actual complaints were they actually confirmed and that they were short-term rentals and not someone's family, things like that. I think that's important for us to know how to deal with the bylaw going forward.
Okay, thank you. Grit?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I do have a couple of questions for you. Number one, you've said this on several occasions, and I am going to ask this question in all seriousness. Are we really writing a new bylaw? Because that's not my understanding of what we're here to do.
No, we're not.
But then why do you say we're writing a new bylaw?
I haven't said we're writing a new bylaw. I said we've got the bylaw here that we're going to make changes to, or we don't make changes to it.
Okay, so I've listened to Valerie and I've actually been in contact with Valerie over the past year, as well as other STR residents bothered by STR owners. And my submission was kind of bringing us back to where we should be as a committee. And that is, number one, what is the purpose of this committee? And we're missing the point. One is the goal and what are our guiding principles? And we need to be following through on that. So I have it in my submission. So that'll be number 3 in what's coming forward here, okay? And then there's also an overview of the bylaws, which we have. And then the Airbnb host agreement, so that we understand what the terms are within the Airbnb host agreement. So we know what our protections are for members and for third parties and for the government. So that's there. And I address bed and breakfast establishments. And then number 5 is blank because I don't presume to make draft
So Valerie,
recommendations to council.
or sorry, Grit, if this is your package.
No,
that-
this isn't my package. I'm just saying that we need to be discussing that. And in order to meet the terms of our goal, we need to be looking at all matters associated, which means what Elisa has introduced and what Valerie has introduced, because it was all of these matters that were involved in the association or in developing a bylaw. So we should be looking at it. We have to. We can't ignore it.
Well, I'm just saying it, we're not going to get any closer to getting our bylaw redone by bringing up things that's happened. We know there was issues. That's why we're here today. If we haven't had any issues, we wouldn't be here today. So we
Correct.
know we've had some issues.
Right. So it's not to rehash all the issues, but when questions are being asked to ask about rehashing the issues, then we'll have to say, no, we're not going to answer those questions then, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't want to bring that up in here. I want to move forward with the bylaw.
That's
We
what I
know.
try to do here.
Okay,
So, thank you.
but we can bring yours up under new business. Okay, so in saying that, I would like to make a couple things before we move forward. So in the terms of reference, the council has put this together for us, and the short-term rental ad hoc committee will review the following items: licensing fee, final inspection, electrical inspection, emergency contact, the guest registry, minimum insurance requirements, maximum number of rental days per year, minimum number of rental days per year, number of guest rooms, sign posted on the short-term rental property with the owner's name and contact information, septic inspection frequency, parking, fines, and bylaw enforcement. And then the zoning bylaw was added last meeting. So those are the things that they want us to focus on. Yeah. Okay. So
Mr.
everybody has this terms of reference. All right. So let's stay focused on those items. And if a group, we want to put something new onto that's going to help us, then we can talk about that as a group.
Mr. Chair, I understand what you're saying. I'm saying that the situation continues and that that's why I prefaced with my personal experience before I got into the comparisons that we were supposed to be looking at from our first meeting. And I tried to do those in point form.
Okay. Point taken, Valerie. And we know there's issues. We know there's issues on a few different places in our township. And like I said before, at our first meeting, this council is dedicated to getting our bylaw enforcement done, not only with the rentals, but all the other stuff that we have. So, okay. We had a mover and a seconder, so can we move on to item 7? Do we need a,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, did you want to make a motion to, or propose that a motion be made to receive and file the information?
yes, absolutely. So can we have a motion to receive and file this information?
Before we do that, sorry, can I just ask
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
question? Have the details of those complaints, it's been in prior agendas, and I brought it up in my correspondence for what I presented. Has that correspondence from town staff, is it available for us yet about the complaints?
It's not available. Go ahead, Jennifer, if you can comment.
Unfortunately, given the nature of bylaw complaints, only certain of it information is available in a generalized nature. We cannot give specifics regarding complaints. We can give an overall generalization of it. We cannot give addresses. We cannot give the specifics. We cannot give the details regarding the investigations. We can say that they've been investigated. We've generalized them. Sorry, I'm speaking for bylaw because Daryl's not here right now. I can call Rob up in a minute and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. Please, Rob, do so. But under the way bylaw works, we can't give out the specific details regarding a complaint to members of the public. And because you're not counsel, you can't be party to the specific complaints of a bylaw, of a bylaw complaint. So we can give you the general nature of them, which was provided. They were noise, there were fire, there was parking, there were, I don't, Daryl did that, so, but that's what we can give you.
And Jennifer, do you know if they were verified that they were actually short-term rental hosted properties? Like, I know that there's, that they were saying that
Yes,
they
the
were, but
the-
without them, how do you know? How did bylaw know that they were actually hosted short-term rental places that the complaints were for? I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay.
So, and the
I-
only reason I asked that question is because I know of one person that had bylaw out to their property.
Mhm.
I've spoken with this individual and there was a complaint made at his property. He does own a short-term rental.
Mhm.
He lives in a neighboring, his house is next door. He was not renting his property. His family was here from out of town and they were staying with them. A bylaw complaint was made.
Mhm.
Bylaw came out. They had discussions with him, but it wasn't an actual it was not a rental situation. It was family at his house. It was not being rented. He owned the
Okay.
property. And so that's why I think we keep asking about the complaints to know whether they were actually verified. They're under the short-term rental and everyone is very worked up about.
I can confirm that there have been noise, fire, trespassing, complaints against verified short-term rental accommodations.
Right. So
I cannot verify, I cannot tell you the locations of those because we can't give identifying information.
Mhm. No, and I wouldn't expect that we had
Yes.
names or necessarily addresses, just
They
just
have
wanting
been-
to clarify that they were actually
Yes,
confirmed short-term rental.
yes, there were.
Mr. Chair,
One sec. Nicole was next.
Just one quick question. Of the complaints that were put forward about short-term rentals, did the bylaw officer actually go out and enforce the bylaw? Did he give a fee, a penalty, et cetera, to the people that were complained about? Because I feel like that's how this all started, is the complaints were not enforced by the bylaw officer, therefore it gets out of hand. And can we verify that they were enforced at the time, these noise complaints?
I don't think at this point we
There have-
definitely can't.
No, there have been no
But-
fines laid under our
No
short-term rent
fines.
to date. There have been, well, we also have no licenses issued and many of the short-term rental accommodation people haven't submitted their applications. We've received a few in, but not many.
Excuse me, but a noise complaint, we have a bylaw for
Yes,
that.
we do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
But
thank
the
you.
noise bylaw doesn't contain a fine.
Okay,
The noise bylaw doesn't contain a fine penalty. That's contained in the short-term rental accommodation licensing bylaw.
but these
Okay.
noise complaints, a lot of them were before the short-term rental licensing bylaw came into effect. The ones that created the bylaw. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Like anything that I've seen, yeah, anything that I've seen is literally just short-term rental. So anyway, okay, so let's get back on track here. Grit, one more.
Jennifer, when was the fines, the fee schedule, the fine schedule taken off of the noise bylaw? There
I'm sorry.
indeed is a fee schedule.
Oh, is there? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yes.
I
Oh, yes.
apologize then.
fact, the
I apologize, Grit, because I'm not the bylaw enforcement officer. I didn't think that the noise bylaw had a
It does.
fee schedule. Okay,
Yeah, and
then
it's pretty hefty
pretty
too.
hefty. Okay, well,
Well,
I
There
apologize.
you go.
I
Yeah.
apologize to the committee. I was unaware that the noise bylaw contained a fee.
So
I would
questions
also
are-
like to further say, as far as these STRs go, that the residents from all areas of the township submitted the address numbers of the STRs for the township to use.
Okay.
Sorry.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. You have Mr. Gilchrist that has been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I don't, okay, go. Yes. Because my screen isn't big enough to see everybody here. I apologize.
My turn?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. My question to Jennifer, under the Freedom of Information Act, you're absolutely right. Individuals can't be identified. Once there's a reasonable number, and I don't know what that number is, the data can be aggregated though. And I wonder if for our next meeting, it would be possible to categorize those by law enforcement calls, separated by those pertinent to short-term rental or similar, something to do with accommodation that isn't strictly according to the zoning versus any of the others. If the number is very small in each category, one or two, obviously it fails the test. But if the numbers are great enough, and in doing that, again, if the numbers are great enough, if there can be a distinction made between those that were on the waterfront, either one of our waterfronts, and those that weren't.
We lost you, Steve.
Oh, there he is. I think he's back.
There.
Are you back, Steve?
I'm here, yep.
Yeah, it just,
froze.
you're froze up there.
Oh, okay. I was just asking, so if we can aggregate the data, that's great. And if there can be a distinction made, if the numbers are high enough, between those that are related to a property on the waterfront, either one of our waterfronts, and those that didn't, I think that would also be useful information as we move forward. Thank you.
You, Steve? Okay, let's move on. So we had a motion on the floor here to receive these two items.
I'm sorry, Chair. That was an actual request that he's asking of staff to bring a report back to the committee. That would be the time now to maybe raise a motion to see if committee is in agreement to have that done.
Okay.
I would
So,
make that motion.
Steve, you there again?
I am indeed, so I'm happy to move that, and I think Valerie had just said she'd second it.
So do you want to put that motion on the floor? How do you want to
Sure.
say it?
I move that the staff prepare a report categorizing the bylaw complaints related to short-term rental properties or similar, and if possible, categorize them by those on waterfront properties and those that are not, as well as categorizing them by the nature of the call.
And I would second that, Mr. Chair, with an addendum if the mover would agree, and that cover the time period from when the bylaw was passed to the present date.
You okay with that, Steve?
Happy to do so. Thank you, Valerie.
Mr. Chair. Steve, I was also wondering if we could make an
So-
addendum to your motion to also potentially add whether those STRs were owner occupied or non-owner occupied.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. I'll consider that a friendly amendment.
Okay. We're kind of doing this backwards.
I would like to add that it be a thorough report and not just what's come through the online complaint process, because there's a lot more that has been submitted in writing or through phone calls, and there should be records of that.
Okay,
I think those need to be verified by bylaw, that they were actually not just somebody
I'm
writing
sure.
in.
Okay. Do I have a mover?
No. we
Yeah,
didn't.
I-
We had a mover
Oh,
and a
mover and seconder. Okay, so
We
all
need
in
to make
favor,
the vote.
all in favor of this motion?
Hands up, please, just so I can make a count. Pretty much all.
Carried. Okay, now. Going back to a motion to receive. The items number 6. For information. Do I have a mover for that?
Move.
Mover from Alicia, seconder. Nicole, all in favor? Carried. Okay. Item 7, policy review terms.
I'm
Right.
sorry, there are 2 items listed under item number 6. One of them.
Oh,
was
okay, I was
Valerie's
doing them together.
submission.
Okay. So the first one was Valerie's. The second one would be the one from Alicia Montney. Can we have a motion to receive and file that? Britt? Seconder? Nicole? All in favor? Keep your hands up there.
Okay.
Carried. Okay, moving on to item 7.
Well, I'm sorry, at this point, because there is a motion to receive and file and have it on the floor. It was Alyssa's submission, so she can speak to maybe the bylaw amendments that she wanted to see coming forward. If the chair is
Yeah, no,
acceptable
that's,
to that.
yeah, absolutely. Alicia, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I would. So I would like to see, the bylaw amendment reviewed for, the locations of where, for the zoning bylaw where, STRs would be able to operate. Currently, it seems, that when the STR bylaw was put in place, the zoning bylaw was also amended, which caused, not an outright ban on short-term rental, on any new short-term rental, but essentially because, and perhaps Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that, a dwelling can be located in a commercial or industrial zone, which, essentially has banned, all outright, short-term, any new short-term rentals. So I think that's super important, that we discuss that really before we discuss anything else in the in the short-term rental bylaw, because that's of huge importance. So where they can be located and if essentially coming to an agreement how we take off an outright ban. There's also the issue of, I know we had talked in the last meeting that we would like to amend the current bylaw so that the current short-term rental operators, by reviewing the licensing, that current short-term rental operators that are grandfathered could move forward. However, I feel that is really unfair to anyone new. Anyone that wants to start up a short-term rental, because it essentially doesn't allow for that, which is why I had, although I understand it's really important that we need to make sure that the short-term rental operators that are not operating in good faith with regards to some of these complaints. I think that it's highly unfair to those that are not able to start something up because the bylaw, the zoning hasn't been reviewed. And in the last meeting, Jennifer had said it would take quite some time to amend the zoning bylaw, which would take a month or more, which then would have to be re-amended for the short-term rental bylaw. So it's very layered there, which is why I had suggested that we put a moratorium on the current bylaw until everything can be sorted out as one, rather than stepping it and staging it.
Mr. Chair,
Okay,
through you, Jennifer, could you just explain that process?
Certainly. You mean the zoning bylaw amendment process?
Yes.
Yes,
because this
sure.
is- I think this is, we don't want to get hung up on that.
Yep.
Can we just kind of move into that? Because I'm going to give the floor to Jennifer here after we open up the zoning bylaw. All right. So can we have a motion to receive and file
Yeah, we've already done that.
from the court? Okay,
Yep.
all right.
We just need to vote on it and I think we have, so we can move forward.
Okay, awesome. Okay, item 7, policy review item. To review the short-term rental accommodations zoning bylaw. And Jennifer,
Sure.
you want to have the floor?
Through you, Chair Armstrong. Everybody was provided with a chart. I apologize. I found one spelling mistake on it already, and I dare say there may be another one. Oak Ridges Moraine Countryside does not have an E on oak. This table is intended to show where it provides a listing of all of the zones in the township zoning bylaw. And I believe everybody was provided with a link to the township zoning bylaw with their agenda package. So these are the zones that are contained in the zoning bylaw. In the first column, I indicated where single detached dwellings are permitted. That's our predominant form of residential housing within the municipality. In the second column, it's secondary, where secondary dwelling units are permitted. And typically, secondary dwelling units are permitted everywhere that a single detached dwelling is permitted, save and except for on the Oak Ridges Moraine, where you can only have a secondary dwelling unit within an existing dwelling in certain zones. And then the next column is where short-term rental accommodations are currently permitted. And the next column is where bed and breakfasts are permitted. One of the discussions that took place when we were, when council previously considered this was, should short-term rental accommodations be permitted where traditional bed and breakfasts are permitted? So that a lot of discussion has gone into the current bylaw and lots of different options were discussed. And previous council voted on this bylaw, the zoning bylaw amendment that we have in place right now. They said, okay, this is what we're going to do. But a zoning bylaw is I like to call it a living, breathing document, even though it's paper. It can be changed through a process in the Planning Act called a zoning bylaw amendment. The zoning bylaw amendment requires public notification. The Planning Act requires 20 days notice. When it's a bylaw that affects lands within the entire municipality, the Planning Act requires notification in a newspaper with general distribution in the municipality. In addition to that notification, when the previous zoning bylaw amendment was passed, we put notice in the newspapers. There's actually 2 newspapers. There's the Northumberland News, there's the Community Free Press that does part of the sort of northeastern portion of the municipality. It was also put on the township's website, the Facebook page, the consultation platform called Let's Talk Alma Calderman, and it was included in two township newsletters, one dated March of 2022 and one of June 2022. I believe it was also put on the digital signs that we have at the Grafton Arena and the Alnwick Civic Center, but I don't have a digital proof that we put it on there, but I believe I requested it. So that's the type of notification that we give 20 days prior to a public meeting. That public meeting is then held by council. Anybody can make a presentation. It's a public meeting. Public can give their opinions on it. And after that, council makes a decision. After a decision is made, a notice of decision has to be given within, I believe it's 14 days of the passing of the bylaw. And then there's a 20-day appeal period. If no appeals are received, the bylaw comes into effect the day that it's approved. So that's the process. And that process generally takes usually about 3 months by the time. That's if I get an application. If it's township driven, we might be able to cut a month off of it, but that's cutting it to the bare bones. That's getting it in the newspapers. That's having the public meeting. That's making a decision promptly after the public meeting, and then getting the notice of decision out. And then the notice of decision also has to be put in the paper also. And then there's the 20-day appeal period. So what I've done is provide, because it was my understanding that the purpose of our meeting today was to discuss where short-term rental accommodations should be permitted. So we have this handy dandy spreadsheet. We can go through it, or you can have a discussion regarding where you think short-term rental accommodations are appropriately zoned. What I would like to say is that residential uses are not appropriate in the general industrial, the extractive industrial, the waste disposal industrial, the community facility, the open space, the environmentally sensitive areas, and the provincially significant wetland zones. One does not typically have residential uses in those zones. And I think everybody can see why we don't permit residential uses in those zones. But everything else is pretty much up for committee's recommendations as to where you would like to see short-term rental accommodations permitted. And one of the things I could say is, if the committee has any recommendations with respect to minimum lot sizes or separation distances and that sort of thing, those are conversations that can be had also.
Thanks, Jennifer. Would it make sense to maybe go over and maybe ask the questions why the old bylaw kept these, rural agricultural and rural residential, those top 5 or so, out of the bylaw?
Council may through you, Chair
Yep.
Ainsworth. At that time, council didn't want short-term rental there were too many issues with short-term rental accommodations, and it was their decision to not include short-term rental accommodations in those zones. One other thing, the limited service residential zone is a residential zone that's applied to properties on private roads. That is something else that some municipalities have given consideration to, whether or not a short-term rental accommodation should have frontage on a year-round municipally maintained road.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, to that issue, I would say that both shoreline residential and limited service residential having Airbnbs, short-term rentals in those locations, I believe there's quite a bit of opportunity for council liability and confusion, conflict. So I would speak to those two as remaining STR free with any change in the bylaw. I would like to hear a definition to understand rural and how populated that area would be, agriculture, how populated that area would be, rural residential, and hamlet. If Jennifer could to speak to that sort of in a generalized way, so we would have a feel for how congested shoreline residential and limited service residential are usually extremely congested, where premises are cheek to jowl, so to speak.
You want to go?
Okay. Through you, Chair Ainsworth. The shoreline there's a difference between shoreline residential and limited service residential. Shoreline residential dwellings have frontage on a year-round municipally maintained road. They may be on the shore, but they have frontage on a year-round municipally maintained road. So that's the distinction between those two. The minimum lot size for properties in the rural zone is 5 hectares. The minimum lot size for properties in the agricultural zone, I believe, is 20 hectares. The minimum lot size for rural residential zone is 0.4 hectares. Hamlet residential, it's generally 0.4 hectares. However, in plans of subdivision where hydrogeology studies and engineering has been undertaken, that size can be reduced somewhat. Sometimes they're as small as 3.25 hectares. So those are generally, now I'll give a primer in planning in a rural municipality. In the rural municipality, we've got generally settlement areas, where we have like Grafton, Centerton, Roseneath, Fenella, those types of things. Those are our settlement areas. Residential development in those areas is generally hamlet residential. Then we have the rural area or all the other area. And all the other area is divided generally into two separate areas, rural and agricultural. The agricultural lands are generally the prime agricultural lands, which are class 1, 2, and 3 under the Canada Land Inventory for Agriculture. And 5, 6, and 7 are the rural, the rural. And class 4 lands go either with the agricultural or the rural, depending on whether they're sort of clumped in with the class 1, 2, 3 or the 5, 6, 7. So on your zone schedule, if you looked at it, the green areas or the hatched areas are the agricultural areas, and the blank areas were the rural areas. They have, while they can be farmed, they generally have a lower capability for agriculture. That's not to say that they're bad lands. And then interspersed within the agricultural and the rural zones, there are rural residential lots that have been created over time in accordance with the township's zoning or official plan. They're generally 0.4 hectare lots. Sometimes they're a little bigger, sometimes they're a little smaller. They shouldn't be, but sometimes they have been some that have been created that are smaller. And those ones are zoned rural residential. There are existing, they're called legal non-conforming lots or non-compliant lots that are smaller than the minimum lot size required for the agricultural and the rural zones. So there might be, I know there are properties out there that are less than 5 hectares that are zoned rural. And there are properties out there that are less than 20 hectares that are zoned agricultural. But generally, that's the way it works within the municipality.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
1 second, Valerie, just didn't.
Yep.
Great, go ahead.
Jennifer, one of the things that I was puzzling over for quite a long time actually was the difference between bed and breakfasts and STRs. And I sort of came to the conclusion that a bed and breakfast is in a single dwelling unit that doesn't have an STR or a secondary dwelling unit in it, not STR, secondary dwelling unit, which was permitted under the new legislation passed by the province and also now passed by us. So to my way of thinking, a bed and breakfast, because it wasn't changed and moved out of the zoning bylaw, I'm assuming it is not an STR. And so it shouldn't even be subjected to the STR bylaw because the owners are present and they're not providing a full unit for them to live in with kitchen, everything associated with that kitchen and full living space separate from the house itself. Is that a correct understanding?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
We did have Valerie up next.
if, Mr. Chair, if it's the right time, I would make a motion that based on the information that Jennifer has provided to us, that rural and agricultural areas, which are of a larger, other than the existing legal non-conforming, would be areas where STRs could be permitted. But in areas where there is a density that can lead to conflict and council liability, I would not make that motion. So I'm suggesting adding rural and agricultural to the areas that STRs are permitted.
Okay, I would like some more discussion on it before we make any motion and stuff. I think if we just keep the floor open for a bit and let people have their say, and then we'll make a motion, but I do appreciate your thoughts there, Valerie. But I'm going to give Nicole the floor here.
Thank you. It's a question for Jennifer. Can you define general commercial, hamlet commercial, and recreational commercial, please? Or just give me an example.
Okay, I'll read you the permitted uses in the general commercial zone. How's that? I'll read
Sure.
list of permitted
Yeah.
uses. Permitted uses in the general commercial zone are an accessory single detached dwelling, an accessory dwelling unit, an assembly hall, auditorium, community center, elderly person center, an auction barn, a bakery, small scale, a bake shop, a building supply outlet or lumber yard, a business, professional, administrative office, a bank, financial institution, commercial greenhouse, a commercial or private club, a day nursery, a drive-through facility, an eating establishment, equipment sales, rental repair establishment, a flea market, a funeral home, a garden home, or a garden, nursery, sales and supply, a hotel, motel, laundromat, laundry or dry cleaners, medical or dental, miniature golf, any type of motor vehicle, excluding a motor vehicle body shop, a parking lot, a place of entertainment, a place of worship, printing or publishing establishment, propane refill establishment, public park, public transportation depot, returnable public use in accordance with section. Blah, blah,
Okay.
blah.
I got
Okay.
it. So I can have a short-term rental in a gas station or in a
No,
church?
that's no, that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is a single detached dwelling is permitted as an accessory use in the recreation commercial zone and in the general commercial zone. And in the general commercial zone, you can have a short-term rental accommodation within that single detached dwelling.
Okay. And what about a hamlet commercial? Same thing, but in a hamlet?
Correct.
And recreational commercial would be an arena or
Well,
village
let's
hall
just-
or.
I don't do a
community
lot with
center.
recreation commercial, so let's just, yes.
So we can
It's-
have
it's got
STRs in
A
those places.
recreation commercial is almost identical uses, except it also includes a tourist establishment, a hotel or motel, a trailer park, a private
Okay.
park, marina.
So,
You
okay,
can have STRs in those.
we can
zones.
have STRs in those.
Yes, in a single detached dwelling, yes,
Okay,
right
no
now,
comment.
right now, without any changes to the zoning bylaw. And sorry, I just want to get back to something that Alyssa said about putting a moratorium on the existing bylaws. Unfortunately, you can't just put a moratorium on the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaws in effect, you'd have to pass a zoning bylaw amendment. You could put it, you could pass an interim control bylaw that would, but interim control bylaws generally prohibit things for a period of time. Well, it gives council an opportunity to study something. So in order to change where they're permitted, township needs to go through a zoning bylaw amendment process.
Okay. One sec. I just had two up here in the screen. So Valerie, you're next.
Oh,
Valerie?
I'm sorry, I didn't put my hand down.
Oh, okay.
I would still be looking for a seconder for my motion, please.
Well,
More discussion.
we're still in more discussion, Valerie, if we can hold that motion off for a bit. And Grit, you're next.
So I'm not against looking at the zoning bylaw amendment. However, we haven't really gone through our bylaw, the licensing to license, govern and regulate the STRs in full. We haven't done that. I think it's premature to try to be changing the zoning bylaw when the township bylaw enforcement hasn't stepped up yet to get the existing STRs that are causing problems and are in fact in violation of the bylaw right now because they are advertising already for this year. And they have not been licensed. So they could be fined a fee right now. So when are we going to get that portion under control? The sooner the better, because then we can move on. I mean, I'm not against having STRs. I do believe that they should be strictly regulated in hamlet, shoreline residential, permanent residential areas where there's dense. I'm with Valerie on that, and I will second her motion on that one. But I'm not sure we should be opening it up anywhere yet when we really haven't had a chance to get the things under control. And why this bylaw was passed, the zoning bylaw amendment was passed the way it was to give the township staff time to get that done.
Okay.
Mike, one more
I
thing?
would say that as a full package, we need to do this. Because obviously, there's some issues. But so I would say that we need to probably get through this zoning bylaw and make some recommendations to council. So I would hope that we'll keep some discussion going and then we'll, and again, if I could ask our deputy clerk, so at this point, are we making a recommendation or are we gonna pass a motion as this for the ad hoc committee?
A motion and a recommendation, they're basically the same. But it's, if you're satisfied there has been enough discussion to make a motion now, that is your choice, but I'm not sure if we've gone through all the questions.
Yeah, no. I just want to, because when we get to the point, I just know because council has the last say in everything. So whether,
Yeah, we
so
can
to
make
me,
a
it would be a
motion to recommend to council
Yeah.
when we're done the discussion, if that's what
Yeah.
committee chooses to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Alicia?
I have a couple of things. One, I wanted to ask Jennifer, when the zoning bylaw was amended, from the time that it was being reviewed to the time it was amended and passed, do you know, in the previous one, do you know what that time frame?
The first report came to council on short-term rental accommodations on October 28th, 2021. It was on the agenda at the January, these are all at the municipal planning meetings, the January 27th, 2022 municipal planning meeting, the February 24th, 2022 municipal planning meeting, the March 24th, 2022, the April 26th, 2022, and the May 19th, 2022. So it was October to May. So it was about 7 months that it was under discussion, and it was on the agendas, which are public documents for during that time. 6 times plus the public meeting.
So what you're saying is that it took 7 months to amend that zoning bylaw.
It took 7 months for council. The first report was a very preliminary. Council wanted to know what they could do for short-term rental accommodations. What were their options? So the first report, and I think all of these reports were provided to the committee at the original, with the original package. So it was basically what can the municipality do? You can pass the licensing bylaw and you can pass a zoning bylaw amendment to regulate short-term rental accommodations. And then from January to May is when they looked at different options. Now, the time between when they decided they got, I won't call it serious, but by the time we were giving notice was given on the beginning of April. So it was April 7th, 2022 for the April 27th public meeting. And the bylaw was passed on May 19th. So that is about 2 months. So there was a lot of discussion and lead up to it. And then they decided that they were going to do actually pass a bylaw. And it was 2 months.
So that's actually quicker. The zoning bylaw
Was passed on May 19th. So that.
Sorry,
Who's
someone just joined, sorry.
Okay.
so that means that that was actually amended more quickly than it may typically be before you said it probably take about 3 months.
Yeah, and when I said 3 months, that's what I tell applicants when they're submitting an application, because that's by the time I receive an application, I go through the application and I get it circulation. Now, when it's a municipally amended one, I think I said today that we can shorten that up probably to a couple months. And it's possible. You just have to, the thing is, because we do have to publish it in a newspaper and our newspaper is only published once a week, you have to actually make the deadline for getting the ad in the newspaper. Otherwise you miss a whole week. And while it may not seem significant, sometimes when you're timing these things, it can be.
You know, in that public meeting, you had said there was a public meeting that before they had to put a notification in the paper, and then there was a public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment to be passed. You know, if anybody attended that public meeting?
That public meeting, oh yes, that public meeting was the public meeting that was held in the Alnwick Civic Center.
Sorry, no, I mean, when council passed, that was an open. Public.
Oh, that was an open meeting? I don't have,
That people could
oh
ask
yeah,
questions.
people, oh no, so sorry, there's two, the public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment was held at the Alnwick Civic Center on April 27th. That was the public meeting. That's the meeting where they had the opportunity to speak and ask questions.
That was the zoning bylaw.
That was the zoning bylaw amendment. Yes,
And with that came a short-term rental bylaw.
correct.
Anybody else? Britt?
I would like to get a clarification, please, Mr. Chair, on whether we are going to do piecemeal recommendations or whether this committee will come up with a structured recommendation list to council, as we have a mandate to be done by the end of April. Hopefully, we can be done sooner, rather than one amendment here and one recommendation there.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
What I was going to suggest is, given the nature of the conversation, perhaps we could try and guide it more. And I could go through the list of zones, and perhaps we won't ask for a recommendation or a motion for each one, but maybe a general show of hands as to where people would like to see short-term rental accommodations permitted.
Okay,
Does that
great.
make sense?
Yeah, it makes great sense. Now, can we keep an eye on the TV for hands? Yolanda, is there a way to move them around so I can see all the people on TV here? Because I'm missing some of them on my screen. Like full screen?
Yeah, you full screen it.
Yeah, I still don't. Oh, okay. Great, thank you. That's better. Go ahead, Alicia.
So in the short-term rental bylaw, secondary dwelling units are prohibited. The short bylaw says that they cannot be short-term rentals cannot be used in a secondary dwelling unit. And so in the zoning bylaw, it's showing that they can, although they're not permitted in any of the reasonable zoning areas, but that's something else that I think is important to review.
Yeah,
Again,
sure.
Within the mandate to have secondary dwelling units permitted in all of Ontario.
I think what she's saying, I'll just paraphrase it, is that short-term rental, or sorry, secondary dwelling units are permitted in many zones. And I believe what she's saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you would like to see that short-term rental accommodations are permitted in secondary dwelling units in the zones where they are permitted. Okay. Okay, so
Okay. So we're gonna
one by one.
one by one. And then, yeah,
Let's get it done.
yeah, exactly. So, and can we keep our hands up so we can get a good count?
Okay, does the committee feel that short-term rental accommodation should be permitted in the rural zone? So it's looking like, yeah, Yolanda, can you count hands for me?
Yeah, I have to determine who's on and who's not. So let me just count the ones online. 1, 2, 3.
That's a yes.
Yes, that's the majority.
Yeah, okay, agricultural,
1, 2, 3. 3 online.
rural residential.
Was that a yes, Jennifer?
Yeah, that was a yes for agricultural, rural residential.
1, 2 online. I'm not counting deputy mayor because she.
There's 3 online. Sorry.
Oh, it's three online?
Oh, sorry, it's Betsy Jones.
Yeah, it's Joan. I'm not counting the ones in person here. So 2
Did you-
online plus whoever's voting. So that's the majority. Okay.
That's a yes, okay. Hamlet residential,
1 online.
Got at least 2. Maria's got her hand up as
Yeah.
well.
I'm sorry.
There's,
Who has her hand up?
Maria has put her hand up as well.
Nancy?
Nancy.
Maria is not a committee member.
Oh, I beg your pardon, sorry.
Was that
Good to see her enthusiasm.
was that
Hold on, so I have Nancy.
So sorry.
That's okay. My bad.
I have a raise of hands again. Steve, Nancy, so it's 2 online. 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, that's the majority.
shoreline residential?
I don't see anybody online with their hands up, and there's only 3, so that's no.
Limited service residential?
Could you just clarify,
Oh.
through you, Chair, Mr. Chair, limited service residential?
Limited service residential is residential on
Private roads.
private roads. Limited service residential.
None online.
So it's looking like that's a 10. Okay, general commercial. They're already permitted there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Well, no, well, we're gonna do them all so that this committee we'll start with a clean slate. So
Okay, so general.
Sure.
1, 2.
that's a
Oh.
yes.
Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
Hamlet commercial. Everybody's raising their hands on that one.
Yep.
Okay. Recreation commercial. That's a yes. General, and I think, can we all safely say that they're not appropriate in the general industrial zone?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, the extractive industrial zone? And the waste disposal zone?
Maybe they should be there.
And the.
Now, come
As
on.
long as they got the
I-
septic working.
Well, I'm just being fair to everybody.
Okay, community facility, residential uses really aren't appropriate in the community facility zone, so I would suggest no. Does the committee agree? I'm sorry, that was me putting my own thoughts
What
out
was
there
that?
from a planning perspective.
Agreed.
Move.
Okay. Open space, residential uses aren't permitted. The development zone. Now, this is an interesting zone. The development zone is applied to generally larger properties within a designated settlement area that has the potential for future in-depth development, potential for a plan of subdivision, that sort of thing. And new uses aren't permitted in the development zone. However, existing residential uses are permitted. So it's really sort of like the Hamlet residential, but you can't have a new house there. So this would allow short-term rental accommodations within an existing house in the development zone.
So Jennifer, would Bill 23 with the second dwellings and stuff come into play on that one?
No,
No?
no.
Okay. So if we had a new development,
If you have a new development proposed on lands that are currently zoned development, they have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment process to allow the development of them.
okay,
So I think I saw a yes for that one.
Too.
Environmental protection, residential uses aren't permitted. Provincially significant wetlands, they're not, residential uses aren't permitted. Environmentally sensitive areas, again, those are areas with environmental issues. Generally, they're adjacent to they are environmental features that have been zoned that because of flooding hazards and that sort of thing. So it's not lands that are regulated by Lower Trent Conservation. It's lands that are zoned in our township zoning bylaw.
okay.
So how does the committee feel on environmentally sensitive areas? Residential uses aren't permitted in environmentally sensitive areas.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say
Mr.
no to all 3 of them.
Miss-
Oak Ridge,
Sorry,
One.
Valerie, 1.
Mr. Chair, we went by quickly on the development, and I had a question for Jennifer, through you, if I might.
Okay,
And that is, not knowing what density could be there. That could be quite a dense development, as that's the way that the province is pushing municipalities to better use their existing services and infrastructure. So that could potentially be a quite a dense area in terms of population. Is that correct?
With, it's a complicated answer that I'm going to give you, and I apologize in advance. The development zone is kind of a placeholder. It's put on a property to ensure that no buildings are constructed on a property that would, in a location that would preclude the future development of that property. We don't want somebody investing in a house in the middle of a 10-acre property in the middle of a designated settlement area when the location of that house would preclude future subdivision development, because our designated settlement areas are intended for our residential development. So in
So it
order
could
to do-
a
in order
denser
to
area.
in order to do the development, Valerie, they have to go through a whole development application process, subplan a subdivision, and one of the conditions would be that the property be rezoned. And at that time, presuming it would have to be in the settlement area, it would be rezoned to a hamlet residential zone. And under the recommendations of this committee, they would be permitted in the future zone too, in the dwellings that are permitted there. So right as it stands and exists, all that's permitted in the development zone is an existing dwelling. And what the committee has said is that they would like to see short-term rental accommodations be allowed in those existing dwellings within the development zone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Oak Ridges Moraine Environmental, and that's sort of like environmentally sensitive areas zone, but on the Oak Ridges Moraine, and residential uses aren't permitted anyways.
Okay,
Oak Ridges Moraine Core, residential uses are permitted.
Again.
all in favor of that one?
Let's see, we've got two.
Nope.
3,
There's one online.
hang on.
Yeah, core?
1, 2,
Yikes.
3, 4,
Got four,
which is not majority, I believe.
so no.
Can I make an intervention? So,
Yep.
So with that, in that regard, in order for a house to be included in the Oak Ridges Marine Core, it would be subject to a lower trend.
No.
No, it's not. Okay, so how does that, can you explain that to me for then how that?
How the core works?
Yeah.
The core. No, that's okay. I'm going to go over here to a map. I apologize to people that are not in the audience. This is the official plan for the schedule A to the official plan is the land use schedule. This big white area here is the Oak Ridges Moraine. And it's about, 45% of our municipality, a lot of it's North Mountain Forest, that area. Now, within the Oak Ridges Moraine, the most, not environmentally sensitive, but the most protected area is called the Oak Ridges Moraine Core designation. And it's generally in here. Then there's also Oak Ridges Moraine Countryside Rural and Countryside Agricultural. It probably only says countryside on the zone chart. And those areas are generally areas sort of more on the periphery and that sort of thing, but the core is right in here in the middle. And it's the guts of the Oak Ridges Moraine. And the Oak Ridges Moraine is it's protected because it's like the headwaters of a lot of drinking water areas within Southern Ontario, and it's a really important environmental feature hydrologically.
I understand the
Yeah.
moraine, but I guess what I'm
Yeah.
asking is residential homes are permitted in that area.
Residential homes are permitted in that area on existing lots of record. You can't create new lots.
Okay,
And if a lot was eligible for a building permit when the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan came into effect, then it can get a building permit now. But new lots can't be created, and we can't make properties that were ineligible for a building permit when the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan came into effect eligible.
okay. So I pose this to the committee is that if a STR, you know, if we discussed that, if an existing house was there and they could prove that they had enough capacity to accommodate, you know, let's say a room in their house or something like that, would that be in an existing residential home? I guess is what I'm wondering, if that would be a permission.
That, well, based on what you were just saying, if it's a room in a house, that looks like what would be considered a bed and breakfast under our existing zoning bylaw, which is permitted.
Okay.
So
So-
that you can have a bed and breakfast in the core on the Oak Ridges Moraine.
So let's say a basement apartment then,
A basement apartment,
you know, like a
well,
suite.
a secondary
Within the home.
secondary dwelling units are only permitted within an existing dwelling in the countryside zone
Okay,
on the Oak Ridges Moraine. Because the intent of the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan is to really restrict human habitation on the Oak Ridges Moraine when it gets down to it.
okay, I understand.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, can I speak to this?
Steve
one?
had his hand up first, Nicole, so
Okay.
I'm going to come
Go
back
ahead.
to you. Go ahead,
Oh.
Steve.
Thank you. I agree with everything Jennifer said. And I think one of the things we should be guided as we're going through this list are some doctrines of reasonableness, as well as consideration of what possible confusion we might be raising in the marketplace. If on something like Oak Ridges Moraine Core and linkage, it is already an absolute that you can't build another building unless you had a building permit by November 15th, 2001. So I don't think there are many of the active ones of those floating around. It makes no sense from my perspective for us to put something in there as a possibility, because they're then going to hit the brick wall of the Oak Ridges Moraine Act Conservation Plan itself. So I would say certainly for those two categories, it would be unwise for us to allow STRs. We can debate on the countryside, but on the core and linkage, there really is no option to add anything new. And I wouldn't want Jennifer to be faced with a deluge of applications that are just going to hit a big fat no, that cause extra, and quite frankly, confusion in the marketplace.
So I just, one sec for
Yeah.
Nicole, you're next. So just a comment. So Jennifer, if we had residential units on there now that had built something back, you know, prior to, and they wanted to turn them into a short-term rental.
That's what we're asking the committee
Yeah.
right now, and the committee on the core, we've had a little mini vote and it was no.
But I still have a question.
Okay,
Yeah.
Nicole's got a question there.
Okay,
Okay, Jennifer or anyone on the committee. At the moment, a dwelling unit does not include a tent or a dome or a yurt or a shepherd's hut, etc. But if that was to change in the bylaw, would that be permitted in the Oak Ridges Moraine zone? If a property is already established, would that not be a nice place to have an off-grid nature experience, dome, yurt, shepherd's hut, etc.?
Okay, I will just look at one thing here for you.
Mhm.
We'll look at the Oak Ridges Moraine Core Zone. I believe I'm gonna have the answer for you, but I don't have it right at the tip of my tongue, so I have to work through the process with you
Mhm.
while everybody's here. So Oak Ridges Marine Corps Zone permits fish and wildlife and forest management, conservation projects including flood control, unserviced parks and accessory uses there too. Then if you go up, there's general provisions. I'm sorry, I don't have the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Zone provisions memorized because
There's
the Oak
many.
Ridges Marine Conservation Plan is very, very difficult.
Mhm.
Oak Ridges Marine provisions. Notwithstanding use of existing buildings, structures, accessory uses. I know you think you just want a simple answer to, can we have a tent or not? And the answer is, I don't think so, because I think a lot of the zones permit what's called passive recreation, and passive recreation doesn't include things that change the nature of the land. And when you have to, when you sort of put a tent up, whether it's a portable tent or whatever, you change the nature of it. But I could be wrong.
If it's on wheels, you know,
I
It's just a question.
understand what you're saying, but the purpose of the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan is really to keep the land as natural as possible and
but if
not
it was off grid,
and pardon me,
off the grid,
no, not even off the
No.
grid, just
So
as natural
nothing.
as possible.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. Steve Gilchrist, he was intimately involved in the preparation of the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding of the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan, is to restore it to its natural state as much as possible.
Jennifer, couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, to put as blunt a point on it as I can, in a perfect world, based on the natural and ecological features of different parts of the moraine, in a perfect world, we'd have sanitized every building off the core and linkage. Obviously, far too expensive. That would have created a furor. But basically, the goal with the core and linkage was to say, this is off limits to anything new. No people, no nothing. Let Mother Nature have a space for flora and the fauna to do their thing. And in the countryside, there was a recognition that, because by and large, the countryside are also the farming lands. The core and linkage, by and large, are forested areas or natural grasslands, the Rice Lake Plains, that sort of thing. But really, there was a stark distinction made between the countryside and the other categories in terms of whether any human activity is even a good thing.
Thanks, Steve. Grit?
I think it was Nicole or Elisa that mentioned about mentioned about secondary dwelling units. And yes, the short-term rentals obviously can be in a secondary dwelling unit, but the importance of the secondary dwelling unit and understanding why they were brought around in the first place was because it was an attempt by the provincial government to alleviate a shortage of permanent housing that could be affordable for young adults, families and seniors, so that perhaps families could share but not have to necessarily live in exactly the same house, but they're close. Obviously, some people are using the secondary dwelling units as short-term rentals. That's fine. Like, I can see, I talked with a couple that is in fact doing that. They have built an apartment, a secondary dwelling unit for their mother, and she has since passed away. And so now what to do with it? So they would like to use it just as a short-term rental for seasonal during the summer months, because it's really expensive to heat in the winter with electricity. So that makes sense. And it's helping those people pay the high costs of living where they are. I get it. Another really important factor for us to consider, and it affected Prince Edward County, and I know it affects here, is the fact that there isn't enough affordable housing for staff for some of our tourist operations that are quite large and extensive. Wellness tourism, whatever they are. And so when you don't have housing available for your workers who aren't earning or aren't retired on pensions and whatever else by people who are living here, these operations, and in Prince Edward County, it's a classic example of having to buy houses or build on their own properties to provide housing for their seasonal staff, et cetera. These are very real pressures on the businesses that exist, and I totally understand that. So in the case of any of our tourism industries that have to buy long-term housing, it is long-term housing, it's not short-term housing, because you're housing people to live here so that they can work. That's not an STR. So I think we really, Steve Gilchrist spoke to it earlier, that we need to make the distinction between what is an STR and the zones or the types that are there. Because we have people that are buying up homes that don't, corporations, individuals or corporations that are buying up homes and they don't live in our township. And they're not present when they're renting the STRs. And that's where the majority of the issues are happening. So if we have people that have bought up or have built a secondary unit and they want to rent it as a short-term rental, if they're on premises when they're renting, they're able to control and police, and that doesn't overburden the bylaw enforcement and the township's resources. So I think, again, we went through this. I'm really concerned about the Hamlet residential as people having voted yes, because we really haven't established enough of that portion of this area, in my opinion. I mean, others may not agree with me, but.
Hey, thanks, Grit. Go ahead,
Just
Jennifer.
Back to what Nicole was asking about, recreate the sort of yurts, camping, that sort of thing on lands on the Oak Ridges Moraine. I just found the definition that I'm looking for. It's called low intensity recreational uses. It's in the definition section specific to the Oak Ridges Moraine. And it means recreational uses that have minimal impact on the natural environment and require very little terrain or vegetation modification and few, if any, buildings or structures, including but not limited to the following: non-motorized trail uses, natural heritage appreciation, unserviced camping on public and institutional land, but not private land.
Oh.
That's the one I was looking
Okay.
for, and accessory uses.
Right.
So that's
Got it.
sort of the differentiation between it.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Sorry. I knew there was a
Okay.
definition.
Just gave you
So are
one
we
point.
taking a vote on the core
We took a vote on the core.
and we said no?
We said no. Now we're
Okay.
moving on to linkage.
No.
Linkage, anyone?
Thinking?
I just don't understand. what
Okay,
the-
the linkage is sort of an area between the countryside, which is, as Stephen Gilchrist explained it, is more of the developed area on the Oak Ridges Moraine where people have farms and that sort of thing. It's still on the moraine. It's still part of the Oak Ridges Moraine, but it's been developed largely their farm areas and that sort of thing. And the linkage can be between sort of that area and the core, or between that area and an environmental area on the moraine. So it's one of the more protected areas. If the core is the most protected, the linkage is the second most protected, but just a little bit behind.
And our permits for,
Residential single detached dwellings, existing single detached dwellings are permitted in the linkage zone. It's in that column.
So same question to you again, Jennifer. Same question as before. Would your.
The whole yurt thing?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm not speaking for myself.
No.
Because,
No.
it's just, if anybody else wants to give someone from Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, city, of really.
It's the low
really
intensity recreational uses,
Same thing.
Yeah.
Not on private property.
not on private property.
Okay. Thank you.
So Jennifer, what about grandfathering in these areas?
Well, grandfathering. So you mean that's sort of what we're voting on, or not we, the committee
Yeah.
is voting on right now, is whether or not they want to allow short-term rental accommodations or recommend to council to allow short-term rental accommodations within the dwellings on those properties. And they've said no to the core, and now we're just voting on the linkage.
But I just wonder if we're stepping on our feet if we don't think about the grandfathering clause, because I don't know. Yolanda, do you know if there's any in that core already?
Okay, now I get what you're
Yeah.
saying, sorry. This is for new short-term rental accommodations.
Okay.
This is moving forward,
Yeah.
not looking backwards.
Yeah.
Looking backwards, we deal with the grandfathered ones. This is the recommendation for the committee moving forward.
Okay, good. Clear.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Not to beat this to death, but unless the short-term rental was in place as a use before November 15th, 2001, you can consider that you can think that you've grandfathered some applicant or active STR that's on the core or linkage. They're still illegal. They're illegal under provincial law. So I with the greatest respect, I doubt you have anybody on your list grandfathered that's on the core or linkage, but if you do, you might best spare them the expense of violating the act.
I was also thinking about the ones, Steve, that would be in the existing house.
No,
So that's
but again, it's usage. So residents, I live in a house on the Moraine. That's not an issue. It was a house on November 15th. It's still a house. If it wasn't a short-term rental on November 15th, then you can't add that use today. I think Jennifer would agree with me on that score.
Yes, I believe that is correct. However, I think we would have to have our lawyer look at that one, because really the difference between if it's still being used as a single detached dwelling, like its function isn't changing, it's still being used as a dwelling. It's just the tenure of the use that's changing, instead of it being used on somebody owner occupied, it's being used as a single detached dwelling on a rotating basis. So
I would welcome that review.
yeah, so that's a legal question, and I think that's a little above our pay grade here today. But that is something that a discussion we may have to have with our municipal solicitor.
Okay,
So
Yolanda,
we haven't made how to vote
No.
on linkage yet.
no, but what you said about to get that clarified for grandfathering or using like a split bungalow kind of thing that someone's had a granny flat or something in, which is now wants to use it for a short-term rental in the core.
Okay, so my concern about this very thing is that because a secondary dwelling unit is permitted in the countryside, which we're not at yet, but it's still Oak Ridges Moraine. So let's keep that in play, because it's not the Planning Act that affects that, it's the Oak Ridges Moraine Act. So due to the nature of the Oak Ridges Moraine, would it not be prudent for us to say that there should not be short-term rentals unless the owner is present at the time, because it is a sensitive area?
Why don't we go through, we'll deal with linkage and then we'll come to countryside.
Same question, it applies to them too. So because they can't, how can you go and you set your whole home out in a very sensitive area just because it's been there before 2001?
So far, we haven't made a decision to permit any short-term rental accommodations on the Oak Ridges Moraine yet.
I vote no.
Okay, so linkage?
No.
No.
Okay, linkage, we got to know. Okay, now we're getting into Oak Ridges Moraine Countryside, where we do permit short-term secondary dwelling units. And I believe what Grit has said is that she doesn't believe that they should be permitted in the countryside in a secondary dwelling unit unless the owner is present on site. Is that?
Yes. Was I was recommending.
I would just add to that, maybe to clarify that might be something that we put in the bylaw.
Already in the bylaw. For all STRs that that it has to be the principal residence of the.
To me, it's a little bit gray area for us like that, because I mean, someone could, they could play with that in a heartbeat to where their principal residence is.
We'll
So I
never
think
be
it needs to
able
be, I agree, but I think it just needs to be clarified. I think it's a bit of a gray area.
I would point out to Mr. Chair, through you to Grit, we can always add different conditions to the STRs approved in every zone. So if the
Yes.
question before us right now is just a simple yes or no, I think we can overlay another set of parameters within each category if you and the committee thinks it appropriate.
Yes, so why
Okay.
don't we get an overall, does the committee generally think that short-term rental accommodations should be permitted in the Oak Ridges Marine Countryside Zone? And then we can have a discussion over where specifically, or the tenure of the dwelling ownership after we've made that decision, because if they decide that there shouldn't be permitted in the countryside zone at all, then that's a moot conversation. So should they be permitted generally in the Oak Ridges Marine Countryside Zone?
All in favor?
I'm conflicted, but because we already allow secondary, even with conditions, I think if we're being consistent with the first 5 categories on our bylaw, I'm going to vote yes on this one.
Okay,
Okay, so how many do we have?
1, 2,
That's 3 for yes.
Hmm?
But it's a.
so it's a no.
Okay.
Okay. So Oak Ridges Marine Environmental Plan Review. Okay, this is kind of a moot point because it's an overlay zone that's applied to lands in the countryside that are in close proximity to an environmental. So really the the countryside zones are the underlying zone, and we've said no, so it's a no. So based on the conversation or the discussions tonight, the committee seems to be recommending to council that short-term rental accommodations will be permitted in the rural, agricultural, rural residential, hamlet residential, general commercial, hamlet commercial, recreation commercial, and development zones. Now, I want to take this opportunity. I'm sorry, I apologize, it's not here. There had been some discussion last week about something that people were calling unserviced, what did I call it? Unserviced rural short-term rental accommodations or something like that, and to come up with a definition for that. I think that there should probably be a differentiation between short-term rental accommodations that we've been discussing now and unserviced. What did we? Did I?
Yes.
Wow.
It's in the meeting minutes.
Nature retreat, some sort of an unserviced short-term rental accommodation. Because some of these zones may not be appropriate for unserviced short-term rental accommodations. So does the committee want to differentiate between where unserviced short-term rental accommodations should be permitted versus our traditional dwelling unit short-term rental accommodations as they're currently defined? Yes.
Okay, open for discussion. Britt?
My personal opinion is that the STR bylaw is based on dwelling unit, meaning a full service dwelling, as in a house that has all of the sanitary, cooking, sleeping, those kinds of facilities and housekeeping stuff. For example, your shepherd's hut, to me, I think yours is a separate issue from the STR bylaw entirely, even though you're renting it out in a small, small times. And there's a little campsite that is the cutest little thing that I went and personally saw. And they charge $50 a night just for someone to come in and pitch a tent. And there's a lovely little outhouse that's been built with 2 seats inside, which I'm sort of a little questioning, but nevertheless. It's cute. And but it's great. So something like that, but it doesn't fall under the STR bylaw purview. I mean.
Where
they-
does
they-
it fall then?
that is something that's
Mhm.
has to be discussed
we
with
need
the
to
building
discuss that.
department because, so one of the things that's really important, I think, is that we distinguish a difference between what a short-term rental is and the advertising platforms they use. Because Airbnb, Vrbo, HipSite, all of these, HipCamp, that one, all of these sites are advertising platforms for anyone that wants to rent a bed and breakfast. They can advertise there too. It doesn't make it a short-term rental because that's not the definition of a short-term rental here. So I think we need to get away from calling them Airbnbs or Verbos or whatever they are. A short-term rental in our bylaw states, the definition is that it's a dwelling unit. So these other ones don't really fall under the purview of this particular short-term rental bylaw.
That being said,
Hmm.
if the committee would like to make a recommendation to council that they consider zoning regulations regarding that type of use, that could be included in your recommendation if you wanted to, or it's up to the.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why we're here to, explore all these avenues.
Okay, I would like to add a recommendation for that, that we have council not add it into the bylaw, but that council explore through perhaps a report from planning as to how the zoning bylaw affects those areas and these little nature retreat experiences that just sound fabulous. I mean, how do they fit in? But they don't fit into the short-term rental bylaw, which is a big business thing. It's much different.
So can you answer
would
that kind of, Jennifer? Would it, like for the purpose of the zoning bylaw, would that fit in there? Do we have to make a whole new?
It zoning is a flexible moving thing. You define a use and then you permit a use. So you could define your unserviced, I forget what I called it last week, nature retreat experience. And then you could permit it in certain zones and subject to certain regulations. So that is an option. I would caution, if council asked me, I would caution council in that they would want to very specifically define the scope of it, because I can see that type of use evolving into unregulated campgrounds.
Hmm.
You could permit a maximum of one site for unserviced nature retreat experience accommodation on a property that had a minimum lot area of however many acres, provided it was X number of meters away from a neighboring property. And that is something that can be done. It can be done. It's not in our zoning bylaw right now, but I would really want to define the scope of it, because I've seen things like this. People like to stretch the boundaries of what.
Mhm.
Well,
So 3.9 in our bylaw, pursuant to the zoning bylaw, no person shall market, one sec here, fine print. Shall market, provide, or operate a short-term rental in, and then it gives the areas, and then there's also a spot that defines what you can use as one. Could we put a new paragraph?
See, I don't think you need to, I don't think it needs to be done in the licensing bylaw. Because it's not, it doesn't fit the definition of a short-term rental accommodation as prepared in the licensing bylaw. So it's something that's going to be defined separately in the zoning bylaw. Unless council decides they want to include them as being licensed under the short-term rental accommodation license bylaw. So that's
Okay,
where we run into the.
Mike.
so we,
Chair?
go ahead. I think it was Nicole.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
sorry.
I've had my hand up.
Yeah.
I'm I'd like to go back to Grit's comments.
Go ahead, Valerie.
So Grit made a motion, as I understood it, that these nature experience accommodation are not dwelling units as the STRs deal with them under the existing bylaw. And I think that it's something that council needs to grapple with separate from short-term rentals, and not to confuse the issue further by trying to make it shoehorn into the bylaw. I think that it should be dealt with separately and have a lot of discussion that involve people directly who are wanting to stay in these, wanting to have these, etc. I think it's not, it is outside our mandate.
Through you.
Yep,
Chair
go ahead,
Ainsworth.
Jennifer.
It could be included in the current licensing bylaw simply with the addition of a definition and a definition in the zoning bylaw. So it could be included into this discussion. The committee has a decision to make whether or not they want to include them as part of this process and recommend that a new addition be added to the short-term rental accommodation bylaw, or whether they want to recommend to council that this be considered just as a separate land use, unlicensed, and dealt with under the township zoning bylaw.
Yeah, I think we have a good opportunity to put that together with this committee instead of prolonging into something else. I think we can, I would like to see us try to, I think most people are in favor. It's a great little idea, and more people are looking at nature retreats as we talk about them. So I would like to see us deal with it. Nicole.
So at the moment, you're saying that nature retreats, I mean, there's a whole bunch. I see on Airbnb, someone's renting a locomotive. There's a tree house. There's a round, looks like a UFO built in their yard. So how are you going to define all that?
Well, I think the difference comes into whether or not they meet the definition of a short-term rental accommodation as ultimately decided by this committee, which generally requires a bathroom and a kitchen. Basically, when it gets down.
None of these have those.
Well, some of them, I've stayed, sorry.
Some of them do,
I've
but
stayed in a pretty sophisticated treehouse before, and it
Yeah.
had a bathroom and everything else.
but if you
So,
go on to,
yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
giving you Airbnb as an example, Verbo, not as many, but if you go to the top, you have these little logos, camping, tiny homes, oh my God. And that's where you're going to find all the weird and cool things.
Yes.
Creative spaces, earth homes, etc., mansions, cabins, etc. But all those tiny, eco-friendly, off the grid, no electricity, no kitchen, no bathroom. Obviously, there's a porta potty or whatnot to use, laboratory facilities, hand washing stations, etc. But where are those going to fit? And
And that's what's up to the committee. Do
But
they
there's a
want to have that
broad-
definition, include a definition of the outside nature, I
off the
can't.
grid,
Off
no
grid.
kitchen.
off grid?
Mhm.
And that's where I was suggesting that if the committee wants to discuss that, you can. discuss
And-
it if
Yeah,
you would like.
yeah, no,
One
absolutely.
more, just last thing to add here. If they are not included in this bylaw, are they free to go? There's no, or is there going to
I-
be a whole other bylaw started and
I think if council was asking me, should they be permitted? I would have to look at it, and again, back to my discussion, perhaps it's not inappropriate. I would really want to scope it down into where they're permitted and how many are permitted on a property, because that's where we run into
that's
the
fair.
problem.
That's
That's
fair.
where we run into problems, because people
Absolutely.
stretch boundaries, and Not everybody is a responsible landowner, unfortunately. If everybody was, the zoning bylaw would be very, very thin.
Mhm.
But it's something from a land use perspective that isn't inappropriate, but it's the scale.
Mhm.
Because it goes with the nature of the property, from a rural property
Mhm.
that somebody's living on to having one unserviced thing, to suddenly it becomes a campground and it's not appropriately zoned. And when you have a campground, there are much more regulations that we have to think about.
Okay, great.
That is why I said we need to distinguish between advertising on a site for whatever it is you're advertising and whether it's a true STR. And it's not an STR, even though you're only renting it for one night or 2 nights or a week or whatever. It's still not an STR under our definition within our bylaw and within our zoning bylaw. And
But we
within
can
the-
amend the bylaw.
But why would I want to put a penalty of having to license someone that has one single little campsite that they're charging $50 a night just so someone can come away from the city to come in and have a nice little experience? They're coming in, all they're going to do is pitch their own tent. There's nothing else permitted. They can have a little bonfire, but it has to be called in, but the owners are there in the area. So that's all taken care of. But I don't want to go and hit someone that's doing a one-off, $50 a night for that experience with a $750 licensing fee, as opposed to the Airbnbs that are, or not Airbnbs, that's short-term rentals, not Airbnb. That's just a site to advertise on. So it's like Kleenex. It's become generic, So no, the short-term rentals, some of them are going for $1,400 a night. $800 a night, $1,000 a night. So all they need is 2 or 3 nights over a weekend. And my gosh, they've raked in over $3,000. So it's big business. That's different than a nature retreat. And I don't believe that it should be under the purview of our bylaw. I just don't think it's appropriate there. And I know that there's a resident as well who's speaking exactly what Jennifer's referring to, where our planner current is referring to, wanting to put a shepherd's hut on their lot, but then they could see having more than one, having several shepherd's huts. If you got more than 5, you've got a campground, and then that has to be licensed. It's a whole different thing altogether. So that's why I think it needs to go back to council, and that needs to be a separate item from what we are, because it's not a short-term rental in this purview.
So just a quick observation. So what you're saying is you're okay with having them, but just not with the short-term rental bylaw. Okay, thank you. Alicia. Yeah. Okay, Alicia.
So I just have a question. For the shepherd's huts and the nature retreats and the yurt or whatever, are they actually legal operate? Like, I'm trying to understand, they need to be somewhere. Right now, it feels like they're nowhere. So if they're not going to be encompassed in the short-term rental bylaw, and they're not in the zoning bylaw, to Nicole's point, where are they? If they're just allowed to proceed, then that's fine. But if they aren't, if there's nothing happening with them, if a shepherd's hut or something is operating and someone, a neighbor complains about it because they don't like it or what have you, can bylaw enforcement go out and say this is illegal? And I think Nancy had said that she tried to submit her tent, and when Daryl went out, he said it's not a legal operation for her to have. So that's why I'm trying to look in the interest of everyone. How does that affect Nancy? How does that affect Nicole? Are they going to be shut down if they're not somehow looked after? In the short-term rental bylaw, they could be encompassed by very specific wording or definition. But they don't have to, those particular ones, we could include them so that they have a home essentially, but they could be in the licensing bylaw. We could say these particular ones have a licensing fee that's more nominal. rather than, a $750 fee? Is that, can you impose different fees, Jennifer, to the short-term rental bylaw? They don't
You-
all have
you-
to be.
You can, but I would suggest that perhaps what Grit was saying is rather than defining them in the short-term rental accommodations bylaw, they simply be defined and included in the township zoning bylaw. And by doing that and not including them in the short-term rental accommodations bylaw, then the licensing fees don't apply. It wouldn't be subject to licensing.
So then
If
I would
that's what- if-
second Grit's motion in that, in that, or recommendation,
If
I guess,
that's
in
what
that manner.
council decides.
So could we add those to your chart there for a recommendation?
Yeah, it's not really a zone, but what the recommendation would be is that I'm gonna work with the title, because now I'm not really thrilled with nature retreat accommodation and service. It's kind of a handle.
Nature experiential.
So, we'll come up with some sort of an unserviced, nature experience definition, for accommodation. And I would suggest, if I was asked by council, I would suggest to limit it to one per property in the rural and agricultural zones. With a minimum lot area. I don't know what it would, what my recommendation for minimum lot area would be, but it would be more than an acre.
Mhm.
I know the minimum lot size in the rural zone is 5 hectares. And in the agricultural, I think it's 20 hectares. But we could even limit it to, say, 2 hectares or something.
Hmm.
I don't know, just something so that it's not, if they're gonna call it a nature experience, it should be a nature experience.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be in somebody's backyard, basically.
Okay,
So, the committee could recommend that the zoning bylaw be amended to include a definition of that. And that those be permitted in the agricultural and rural zones.
okay, I like that.
They wanted to.
Mr. Chair.
So let's clear this one up. We should make a motion to,
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
go ahead, Valerie.
Okay, so if this is unserviced, then, and some descriptions have been, someone comes in and pitches a little tent. What are they supposed to do with their waste? Personal waste, garbage, you could expect they would perhaps carry it back out, but I'm thinking if there are no facilities of any kind, kitchen or bathroom, that doesn't sound to be environmentally prudent either.
Well, I would say that we're going to have to come up with a set of rules and with the accommodations for stuff like that. Again,
I think the official word is a privy or an outhouse for unserviced.
Also, we do provide garbage and recycling cans. So it's the property owner who is responsible for that, or I sometimes ask them to take it home with them.
Yeah.
And everybody,
yeah, no, definitely. It would
respectful.
have to come with a set of rules for sure. And accommodation
and
rules.
they're on my property, or say anyone, they're not going to let people just throw garbage everywhere and,
Yeah. Okay, Nancy, you had your hand up?
I was just going to add that our outhouse has a chandelier inside and it's highly serviced. And regarding the garbage and recycling, we're very responsible and have insurance policies, and we're very careful. So I think it's up to the property owner, as Nicole was saying, to, make sure that you're watching over your guests, just like any other type of situation that's happening, and
Okay,
respecting all the bylaws.
Great.
That would fall right in line with the bed and breakfast philosophy, where they just have to comply with the the
The
codes
rules.
and regulations. And so these operations keep the rules simple. It's a simple site. Keep it simple.
So could we come up with a set of rules for the next meeting? Maybe that we could and bring it back to the team. And then we can have a chat about that. That sound good? So should we make a motion to or do we want to come back with some more recommendations with the rules for them?
Sorry, through you, Chair
Yep.
Ainsworth. I'm not sure when your next meeting is.
It's going to be the 6th of April.
It's going to be the 6th of April. Okay, so that's a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if it was next week, then that was gonna be quick turnaround, because I have a conference tomorrow,
Yeah.
so. Okay, that's fine.
So we'll wait to get some more information on that before we make a motion.
For clarification, Mr. Chair, could you explain what it is that we are doing? I'm understanding and I'm not,
So
I want to make sure I understand correctly. We are not adding to the STR bylaw. We are making recommendations for the zoning bylaw. Is that correct?
yes,
Thank you.
and then Jennifer's gonna come back with a recommendation on a set of rules for them.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, the next meeting, if you're thinking of the Wednesday, it'll be April 5th.
Okay. So Yolanda, we had it on the 6th.
No, I do believe it is on the 5th on
Is it?
on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Mr. Chair.
My mistake.
Clarification point, please. Going back to when we picked where STRs would be permitted in the zones. Right now, we're saying that based on what our bylaw says, which means it has to be in a principal residence. So we haven't sort of established any of those distinctions that Mr. Gilchrist raised earlier. So are we going to do that before we just carte blanche, go ahead and say we're permitting in these zones? Or is it just, or are we going to have some input on where it makes sense to make it a principal residence and the owner should be there? Or whether it's can be a full house rental somewhere?
Well, I was wondering if, and my thoughts was that we deal with that in the bylaw. There's a spot in the bylaw that talks about that, and you are right. I think it needs to be more clarified in the bylaw. So when we come back with Jennifer's, she's going to put down all those items that we talked about that we would like to see. There was 2 or 3, 4 for each section that we were going to put together, what we have and what we were going to put in that we picked out of all the other bylaws to put in for. So when she comes back with that, this would be a great time to put in what you're talking about.
Mr. Chair.
Alicia?
I had included in my in the agenda item a recommendation for the bylaw, which kind of laid out what I was hoping to see included in the zoning bylaw, but in the short-term rental bylaw.
Yep.
And so it looks different from the current bylaw, which is obviously why we're here. But I would like to either present that or have everyone agree that they're going to review it and be able to comment it.
So maybe what we can do, Jennifer, if this is okay with you, to take that sheet that Alicia had and the one that Valerie had, could you add them to our existing changes that we would have, like
It's-
just for a conversation?
Yeah, through you, Chair Ainsworth, it's a completely different bylaw. So I can't sort of fit it into the existing bylaw, but what we can do, because I believe at the next meeting, at the April 5th meeting, what I'm going to be bringing forward is the zones where short-term rental accommodations will be permitted
Mhm.
and the provisions for the rural experiential short-term rental unserviced, and the updated bylaw, licensing bylaw with the areas identified for discussion. And I think discussion of Alyssa's proposed licensing bylaw would be appropriate with if everybody has reviewed it prior, when we're,
Yep.
and we'll have that discussion when we're discussing all of the other issues that we identified at the last meeting. for-
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
No, that's good.
is that
Mhm.
okay
Yeah,
with
yeah, that's
everybody?
kind of what I was saying
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, Lish?
Mhm.
Good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so,
I do have a question.
Yep.
Do we want to put a motion forward to make these recommendations to council so that we can get started with the zoning bylaw amendment?
absolutely.
Oh,
Or do we want,
Oh.
how do you want to play this out?
I think that starting with the zoning bylaw amendment at this point in time is premature. I think we best wait until the committee's recommendations are presented to council as a whole.
Okay.
And you'll bring a report to council with your recommendations, because ultimately it's council who's going to be making a decision. They may or may not agree with what the committee has presented to them. But you're presenting that to them, and then ultimately they have to make the decision. So it will be up to council to direct when a zoning bylaw amendment process should be initiated.
Okay, everybody good with that? We'll have one package that we'll put it all together. Great.
So I don't know that we need to make a motion, but Yolanda could say it, but I think I alluded to this earlier when I said I would like to see us as a committee reach a consensus on what we want to bring forward to council as recommendations, and it be done in one document, so it's efficient.
Okay, everybody's good with that? We're just gonna hand one document in instead of, because I think we're under the understanding that we're gonna try to get some of this zoning going because it was gonna take so long. But if we can do it all together in the next 2 or 3 meetings, then that will be just, okay? All right, sounds like it.
If I may too, this, at some point before the end of tonight, I think we need to be realistic on how many more meetings we're going to need.
Yeah.
It's gonna be 2 or 3. I don't see it being any more than 3 myself. And if we drag it on too much longer, we're gonna be rehashing things that we've already
Yep.
rehashed. or
So
gone through.
we'll,
So I suggest that we at the end of this, or maybe at the start of the next meeting, decide how many more meetings we're gonna have.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, like, the terms of reference says April the 30th. I think we could have it done by that.
I think.
Jennifer?
Through you or to you, Mayor Ainsworth,
Yep.
or not Mayor Ainsworth, Chair Ainsworth.
Yes,
I think that actually 2 more meetings should probably do it, because next meeting will bring together the recommendations for a zoning for the zoning provisions, or where you want to see zoning, and an updated licensing not an updated, a licensing bylaw with your decision items. And then the following meeting, you'll make decisions on those. The following meeting, those finalized documents will be brought back to the committee for the committee to vote on, and then put it off to
Yeah.
council. So I suppose there could be a third one after that, but
okay,
2 should get it done.
okay, and that'll put us right on schedule, really. Okay,
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
go ahead. Liz.
I agree that we would like to move it forward. The terms of reference does say that it could be extended, and I'm not saying that we should. My only rental bylaw was rushed last time. I don't think there was enough public consultation. And I worry that I worry that we are going to be conflicted on a timeline of how many meetings there are actually going to be, and we have to get it done on a timeline, on too tight of a timeline. I'm not saying we can't, but I don't think that we should make a decision that it's absolutely going to be done in the next 2 or 3 meetings until we get to that timeline where we're making the actual recommendations, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yep.
I don't think we should say it's only going to be 2 or only going to be 3 until we get to the point where we actually see the end of it, because the next meeting might not be as productive as we hoped. So
No, yeah, no, I think it's the terms of reference kind of leaves it open for us a little end. If we need some extra meetings, we'll take them, but I'm impressed with the work that we've done so far and we're working together and that's the important part. So, if we need more time, we'll certainly take it. Okay, so at this point, we've had enough conversation about the zoning bylaw. We have some direction where we're going to go for our next meeting with it, for conversation. And, so at this point, we can move on. We don't need to make any motion or recommendation, Yolanda, to move on to the next. All I'm saying is that we're coming back with information for the next one. We've kind of got that set.
Yeah,
So,
I think we're okay to not make a motion on that.
Yeah.
Staff are aware of what is required to
Okay.
move forward. So,
Yeah. And we got the minutes to clarify it, so we're good to go. Okay, so the part of this here with Yolanda, or sorry, Alyssa brought up, where we've just dealt with was the zoning bylaw, right? So 8 is kind of an oversight for that, okay? So next meeting. We've got for April the 5th, 6 p.m.
Sorry, Counselor Ainsworth.
Yep.
Because the notice of motion was filled out and was placed on this agenda. It's on the agenda and it's stated as a motion, so Alyssa would be the mover. If no seconder seconded this motion, then it would be a failed motion, so I have to record that in the minutes.
Okay,
Okay, if we could
Okay.
just go through that process.
so. So I'm just going to read it out here. So there was a link here. So received from the short-term rental accommodation zoning bylaw. There was a notice of motion filled by short-term rental ad hoc committee member Alicia Montney. I request to add and review the zoning bylaw to the agenda for the next meeting on March 22nd, 2023, and be included as per my request in the meeting minutes from March 8th, 2023. So do I have a mover for that as Alyssa, and do we have a seconder?
I'll second it because we've
Great.
already discussed it
Yeah.
as per her motion.
Yep, and all in favor was that? That's good, okay. Okay. So now we can go on to the meeting. For our next meeting is the 5th. Everybody good with that? All right. Okay, so I have a motion for that.
No. we
Don't need a motion, okay? So new business for the future discussions. Review amendments to the short-term rental license bylaw and provide recommendations to council. Anything under new business? Grit.
I was the person that asked for this to be put on. As I said, I was unfortunately ill for 9 days over the past 14 days. So I did my best and I just wasn't able to make the deadline. So I did prepare my partial submission. I didn't put down any recommendations because I think that's something we've got to come to as our final consensus. But I'd like to hand this out so that people have a hard copy to read because it's just not efficient on a phone or on a computer when you've got lots of stuff. So if permission to just distribute as Nicole Sterling did with her.
Actually, I didn't, Pat, had to
short
do
ter-
it for me.
Right, but if Yolanda can distribute it for me. And then I have no trouble emailing it to the remaining members that aren't here or that are on Zoom.
If
So-
you give it to me, Grit, I can actually email
Hand
it
it
to everybody. Yep, and I will distribute it
Now,
tonight.
Yes,
before
perfect.
The end of the meeting.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
So do we need a motion to accept that?
No, because Valerie did the same thing at one of our other meetings where she provided written material as well, which I was going to distribute but forgot. But I did email it out to everyone the next day.
Okay.
So this will be the same situation where we hand out written material to people. It just means that Grit cannot talk with regard to this today. However, it can go on the next agenda as well.
It
Okay.
will be on the agenda, right? Yes.
Yep. Okay, good.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question. The material that Grid is providing, that Alicia is providing, and that I have provided, when the STR bylaw comes from the planner to our next meeting, in addition to the discussions we had as we went section by section, will those suggestions that come from these three documents also be included? So we're looking at the alternatives for those areas that we didn't just accept holus bolus, but had issues about.
Yes, they will be part of the discussion for sure.
Thank you.
I just need to make one quick comment. I spelled principal originally Principal, Mr. Gilchrist, and then all the documents had it the other way, and I knew it was wrong, but I thought, well, I'm not going to do it differently. So I copied. So you'll see principal spelled Principle, okay?
Don't want to be too picky, but thank you.
Okay,
Excuse me, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
just one more thing. Grit mentioned the package that Pat handed out for me at the first meeting. We never actually went through it. It was on the agenda to the week after, and we didn't get to it. So is there any way that we can have a look through this as well as we did Valerie's today and
Mhm.
part of Alicia?
can we add that also, Yolanda?
I'm sorry.
Can we add the package?
As long as it pertains to what we're talking about moving
Yep.
forward, I do believe it was put on the agenda already as background information, which provided a lot of the background information as well as Daryl's report, information from Airbnb and the such. So we do have that information if we want to incorporate that as part of the discussion for the amendments, as long as it pertains to it.
Yep.
It
We
also,
put it all together.
excuse me, it also had the benefits of having STRs in our township, which we've never really talked about at these meetings. And I think that's important to let everybody know
Okay.
what we can bring to the township.
Yep. So we okay, we'll add that to the next agenda.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Are we not able to review these on our own so we can get to
Yep.
the point here of, review the licensing bylaw and the short-term rental here? I think I've read through that a couple of times and I don't feel we need to separate again.
Well, I think what we're saying is that there might be some items in there that we need to discuss along with all the other things that we had to, for the bylaw, if we're gonna make changes.
Could she pinpoint those items?
Well, I think that's up to us. She can only present them to them and we'll go through them and pick out the ones that we like or not. Mhm. Yeah, but I think putting it on the agenda is just for information and for us to use for the bylaw. So I think it's important. I think that's what we're here for, to get everybody's input.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we should pick one and not the other. So
Thank you.
Okay, through you.
Jennifer,
Through you, Chair Ainsworth, everybody is providing what they think is the best solution for the municipality generally, and background information from their various perspectives. If that information is included in the package next week, everybody will have an opportunity to review it prior to the meeting. And I don't think that we're going to have a review of line by line of their submissions. But the information as we review the licensing bylaw, and the recommendations and or not recommendations, the decisions that need to be made, they can bring those forward in that, through that discussion, rather than going through, spending the first hour of the meeting going through each person's submission.
Yeah.
Because
No,
they've
good
got,
point.
if that information is provided, each committee member, they should be taking the time to prepare for the meeting and reading that background information.
yep, agreed. So to reiterate that, everybody's, instead of coming back with just with nothing, go through our bylaw, go through all the information that we have, and place what you want to see to replace what we already have. Right, and if you can have all that ready, then that's going to give us a lot more input onto where we're going to go, and we might have 2 or 3 different items for one paragraph. Alicia.
I just wanted to make one other comment, and I know that this has been brought up a number of times about how many licensing applications have gone out, and the number has been put out there as 51 a number of times. But I just, and I understand that there's an urgency to get this bylaw and licensing fee renewed, and that's great. But I just would like to point out that of the 51, Nancy, who's on the committee, and Nicole, who's on the committee, are just two that we can think of right now that are not actually permissible under our short-term rental bylaw and licensing structure. So I understand there are bad apples out there, and we want to, get, sort of a handle on those. But I just want to reiterate that we also need to remember that probably of those 51, there are others out there. I know one other in our advocacy group who rents just one room. So she's actually more of an Airbnb or of a bed and breakfast. So of those 51 packages there, I think there are less actual short-term rentals that would need to be regulated. And I'm not saying those ones don't need to, but I'm just saying that there's less than maybe what you think.
Okay. All righty. So it is about 8:30. And I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. Yeah, no one wants to go home. Yeah. Yeah,
I did.
Lisa, the seconder, Britt, all in favor? Thanks, everybody.